This is Grant Martin, and you're watching the Break It Down Show. All right. Well, Pete Turner has asked me to just go right into my bio, and but before I begin, I just want to do the and announce the ubiquitous. If you work for the government announcement, this is my own. These are my own opinions, not the opinions of the Department of Defense or Special Operations Command. So with that out of the way, my bio in short. My parents were born in Ware Shoals, South Carolina, a little textile mill in town in South Carolina. And my dad went into the Army and made it a career. And so my family spent most of our time traveling every 2 to 3 years, picking up and moving. I grew up all over the United States and spent 6 years in Germany. Spent the first 3 years of my high school in Germany, Baumholder American High School. And my senior year, we moved to beautiful Fort Polk, Louisiana, where I graduated. So I'm a Wampus cat, Leesville High School. Um, then I went to the Citadel, Military College of South Carolina. And from there, I actually went into the brokerage business. I was a stockbroker for a little while in Charlotte, North Carolina, selling penny stocks. And but eventually, I went into the Army and went to Special Forces. I went to the Special Forces School, Ranger School, all those great training opportunities, and ended up at 7th Special Forces Group, and got to go all over Central and South America deployments. Eventually went to Afghanistan. Spent 2 years total in Afghanistan. I also spent a year in Korea, and have been able to do a lot of just amazing jobs and have a lot of amazing experiences throughout my career, mainly because of the non-commissioned officer corps, the NCOs, the sergeants. And as anybody in the military knows, the backbone of the American Army is the sergeants, is the NCOs. They're just so awesome, just the core professionals that we have. That's what makes, I think, the American military so great. And in special forces and special operations, the NCOs are even that much more important. And so being able to work with those folks has really been a huge honor. Learned a lot, and I continue to work in special operations. I'm currently the Warrior Care Program in the Eastern Region officer in charge. And in short, that's a program that takes care of our wounded, ill, and injured. So thank you for allowing me to come on to this, Pete.
Well, the gardener is literally right outside my tent. It's gotten louder while you talk, but let's just talk about this. Let's talk about we failed to do a very good job in Afghanistan, and that kind of goes all the way back to the beginning. How would you assess our like? We always want to go and fix places. We always want to go and help. I mean, like we just found out that there are Syrian refugees all over the place. People leaving Africa trying to go. We have an immigration crisis here. And that's I'm not trying to get political. There's just a lot of problems with people that we're always desperate to help, but we're not reliable about doing it. Let's talk a little bit about how Afghanistan started and what the plan was, as you understand it, and then what are your credentials to talk about that?
Sure. No, at the beginning, I actually did get to interview some of the planners that were involved with the special operations portion of the beginning of Afghanistan. So we're talking about Special Operations Command Central, SOC Cent. Um, and I went and interviewed those folks, those guys that were down there at the time, for a paper that I wrote. And um, essentially, what they told me was the beginning plan, worked really well. We went in with not really that many forces. We overthrew the Taliban pretty quickly. Um, and what happened was, according to these guys, they were told when they asked, okay, what's the next objective? What are we aiming for? To forget about Afghanistan, to go for to concentrate on Iraq. And so initially, I think that was at least one of the reasons, if not the reason, um, why Afghanistan kind of started off on the wrong foot. We accomplished the near term military objective, but then when it came to what's next, I think we just didn't even really think about it too much, at least according to the guys that I talked to. And we kind of we focused our attention on Iraq, and what happened in Afghanistan after that kind of emerged. And I think when I've seen things that are emergent in their quality, um, a lot of times what happens is what kind of is the easy button or the propensity to kind of take place. That's what happens. And so if you're not really trying to direct things or just kind of letting them happen. I think the easy button in Afghanistan was let's try to focus on legitimacy. Iraq had a lot of problems up front about legitimacy in the international sphere, and so I think the decision makers thought Afghanistan was a place where we could try and have that legitimacy label on what we were doing. Um, and so with legitimacy kind of a priority, then we did things like hold elections, um, which seemed to give that perception of legitimacy to what we were doing, but not necessarily wasn't necessarily something that added to stability or long-term capability in the country in terms of governance and that sort of thing. So I think that's my explanation at the beginning.
Well, let me jump in
Um,
there real quick because there's already problems, right, with what we're talking about. Because when President Bush wrote his book Decision Points, he talked about specifically about having a multinational coalition of people focused on different parts of the Afghanistan problem, whether they were there just to provide presence, to train the police, whatever it was. There was a good plan there that seemed to be a multinational effort that we were going to go forward, and we were going to like just echelons or tranches, right? We were going to get through this echelon, then we're going to get through this echelon, but it, you can't. It's hard to manage that, even with the commander over all things. You can't make the French go out and do something that they're not willing to do, or um, the Romanians, right? Here's a problem with the Romanians, and there were Romanians that where I was. This is way late in the game, like 2011, 2012. The Afghans thought that they were Russians, that they had come and they were driving over the top of people, and so these are things that we can't even know that are problems that are undermining our ability to do this. And then the other thing is we talk about legitimacy and we'll hold an election, but then we find out that the State Department is undermining the legitimacy of the election by trying to create an outcome, through the CIA and other people. And they're open about it. This is in the news. You're like, how? So I mean, does it even create legitimacy? Yeah, you get people to vote, but if they're not happy with their vote for political reasons or otherwise, like right now, there's tens of millions of people in the United States that are like, this wasn't a legitimate election. And it's really hard to point to evidence that says, yeah, here's a stack of votes, here's a stack of votes, and one is higher than the other. So we have that problem here. How in the world do we expect to deflate that problem somewhere else where legitimacy with the government is, and you and I talked about this offline. We are the insurgency. We are bringing in a different government. We are completely violating their rule of law and trying to do something that they don't want to do. What gives our general staff officers the belief that they can pull this off, and then ultimately not even train us for that specific mission? They trained us for a combat mission because it's a combat zone. Big question, lots of topics, but I'll let you chew on that.
my take on it is two parts. The first being, again, I think Iraq was kind of the focus, and so Afghanistan was looked at as or in terms of how can we support the Iraq effort. So if there was a decision that needed to be made in Afghanistan, I think the frame that was put on that decision was Iraq. How will this affect Iraq? How will this potentially support us in Iraq? And so if there was a branch of our government that was looking for a specific outcome in anything, but you mentioned the elections, I honestly think the frame was, will this assist us um, in our efforts in Iraq, or at the least not make things worse for us in Iraq. So that's the first piece. The second piece, I think, internally in terms of the military, I don't think there's a secret cabal of generals that meet in some underground bunker and every day decide, we're going to do some screwed up things, or we're not going to train for the current fight, or we're going to do something that just doesn't make any sense. I honestly think that there's 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 two aspects of what the military wrestled with in the last 20 years. And one aspect is, uh, and this has been an ongoing debate within the military, and I think still is, and you see it today in a lot of the headlines about what the military is thinking about next, and that is what's more important, that we prepare for um, high-end conflict, or if you want to say tank on tank or aircraft on aircraft, but peer to peer, whatever you want to call that, conventional type warfare, or do we focus on this counterinsurgency stuff? And it's a huge debate. I won't weigh in where I think necessarily we need to go, but what I will say is that the debate within the military, um, that there's a lot of people, and I think they're pretty much kind of the decision makers right now, that believe you'll lose a lot more people if you lose a conventional battle or war than you do with this counterinsurgency stuff. So we're okay with taking some risk there. Um, but if you lose a conventional battle or war, I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands of people if history shows us. What have we lost, in doing counterinsurgency? A few thousand. So on the risk scale, I think their their point is we're okay with not focusing on training and being prepared to do this counterinsurgency stuff. The second piece, I think, of the military that's probably even more important in my experience is that all of our systems and processes, I would argue, are geared towards that conventional preparing for the conventional threat. So the Cold War, maybe a little bit of World War II, but mainly the Cold War, and then a Desert Storm style conflict. I think our processes and systems are really aligned really well to prepare us for that threat. And you look at our National Training Center, and you look at our other training centers. They are really primed for winning that decisive, if you want to call it phase three, but that decisive battle, kind of incident. Whereas the other stuff is just kind of, we're okay with handling that, because again, the fallout from losing in terms of the military, Afghanistan or Iraq or a counterinsurgency effort, they just don't seem to be that huge. And so, why change all of our systems and processes to to help us with something that just doesn't seem to be that bad if we don't do that great at it. And so and just for one example, our personnel system moves us every 2 to 3 years. You have to go to school and at certain points, and you have like a 1 to 2 or 3 year window where you have to go to this one school or you don't get promoted anymore. Our evaluations are usually 1 year. So all those things combine to have not necessarily supporting us in a long-term place where you'd like some regional specialization, maybe even some language capability. Um, so that yeah, I think all of that together just has the effect that you know of what I would argue is a lot of people frustrated with what we've done in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the opposite question of that is why would we go? I mean, we always say train like we fight, but we don't. And I've asked a lot of special operations folks. I've had them on the show. I've gone out on those kind of missions a lot myself. And you know, when I ask the question, it's have you fired more rounds in combat or had conversations? And you know what the answer is. You've had way more conversations. But we don't train for that. There's not a professional capacity for having a conversation, for understanding culture at a professional level. And I mean a really professional level, like not a mastery of culture no matter where you go. You guys approach that, but I would even be critical of what the Green Berets, if everybody knows that name. I would even be critical that those guys could do a better job. There's no professional school for managing an interpreter and making them a real partner in your partnered relationship. All of these things are things that we could do, but we failed to do that because we looked at coin and said, not that dangerous. And yet we still have people dying from these conflicts years and years later. I don't know if you saw this the other day, maybe yesterday, the little kid from Talladega Nights, the older brother, went on to serve in the military army, I believe, and killed himself the other day. So we haven't had a real tank on tank peer to peer fight in 70 years. Yes, we use tanks in Desert Storm, but I wouldn't call that a peer to peer fight. So when we look at this, and I know there's not a cabal of generals, but maybe these guys are just incapable. I mean, like you and Andy Jingaleski, you guys are a new breed of people, and maybe you all are too maverick to become general officers, which is a credit to both your guys' name. But if you're not going to prepare for the fight, why are we even going? I mean, if we're not going to take the time to really understand how to move culturally, we talk about all these different lines of effort, right? And to create legitimacy and all these other things. But I go out as a collector and I can't find legitimacy anywhere. I go the day after they go to the girls' school to see how many girls are there, and there's no girls there. And the commander's desperate to know this stuff. And then they all learn, when I work with them, to do less, to think smaller, and work within that paradigm. But we all come back as we did it. We won when we were there for our year, but I stayed year after year and watched us continue to fail. And so the bottom line is when we try to create stability somewhere, our presence establishes even greater instability, and that region is better at instability than we are. But we can't think in terms of those terms. And so I understand that the system is designed to help, ship commands cross the T and all that kind of stuff and dominate the air, sea, land battle, but we don't we don't get called out to those fights, or we don't put ourselves into those fights very often. So how do we either master multiple things? And the battlefield now, just multi-domain, whether we agree with the concept or not, we're talking about fifth and possibly sixth generation warfare with all of the things that we see. So I guess backing up, I understand the existing system, but the existing system doesn't net results. So how long do we continue with that? And then, or do we just create this self-fulfilling prophecy of getting into a fight with China because that's what we understand?
Well, speaking on the China thing, I think it's all deterrence. I don't think we're anybody's talking about. I was on a conversation, a Zoom meeting this morning with a bunch of Canadian special operations folks, and they were talking about China and Russia. And, nobody sees a war with China breaking out anytime soon. But so, mainly deterrence. How do we deter them? But going to back to the counterinsurgency prep. Yes, I always will agree with you. We could always do more to prepare for being culturally astute, for language skills, all those things. There are always more you could do. I would argue on the training side, we actually changed, and I'm not one to sound like the corporate guy or defending the institution, but I will say there was a massive change in our training centers. We did send units into uh, the joint the Joint Regional Training Center in Fort Polk, and then the National Training Center in Fort Irwin, um, to specifically train up with role players and do the whole counterinsurgency type train up. I was a part of that, so I did see that, and we did do a lot of change to that. On the other hand, we weren't training our gunnery tables. So there were tank crews that couldn't that hadn't qualified on their shooting their tanks and artillery units as well.
But let me
So
jump in here, Grant, because there's a problem with this, and I'm not challenging you because we're talking about a system, right? I've been to JRTC. I've actually worked and designed training for the role players, and these guys don't understand the command's intent. They're just there to perform a role. And then when I go out day-to-day missions with these units that have come through JRTC or NTC or whatever it is, tankers have qualified so they can run their tank in combat, and they don't have a tank to even drive, right? And so they get out there and they're not culturally competent. They're not prepared to do these things. We can say that we've improved the training and it's evolved enough, but it's nowhere near professional grade. We treat it like familiarization fire, which for the audience, that's like grab your weapon and shoot it in this fashion so you've done it before. And that way, the next time you come across somebody, you can. But we don't measure how to establish rapport. We don't measure how to build trust with someone. We don't communicate. You think about when we partner, all of these different partnerships are going on. Everybody thinks that their partner is great and they're doing a good job. But if you look vertically or horizontally across that communication network, we never trust our partner's partner. We always have these negative assessments of them. So I would say the training has evolved, but it's woefully inadequate to even come close to understanding what it takes in a counterinsurgency environment. And again, and I'm not challenging you, but this is the conundrum, right? Like we've improved training, but look at the results. They're not improving. And I can go out and see like these guys fully are not prepared when they come out. We did training at JRTC specifically. One of the blocks of instruction. And there's only so many hours, right? Like if let's say there's 100 hours of training that we do. One of these 100 hours was focused on a fishbowl interview, which for the audience is we all sit and we watch an interview. And it was an American service member acting as an American service member, talking to an American service member, acting as an American service member, and they were talking about supply issues. They wasted our time watching an in English conversation about things that had nothing to do with what we were about to go do. So if 1% of the training right there is not establishing some kind of benefit, all of it comes into question. And I would say overall, my experience from my pre-deployment trainings, 5% of it was relevant to what we were doing. 5%. Maybe it's better for a military unit. Maybe it's 15, but it's not 50. You know, you have LTs, lieutenants for the audience, talking to colonels in the Iraq army or in the Afghan army. And I look at them and I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, they're so inexperienced. They're so raw. They're incapable of reliably going out and doing this job well. They're willing, but not capable. So yes, the training evolved, but I wouldn't say it improved, because these unit after unit came through and made the same mistakes. And unless you had stayed and were able to guide the unit to avoid the mistakes, they all made the same mistakes over and over again. And again, left with great intention, belief that they had changed something. But you and I both know, if we go to Diyala province in Iraq with the list of all the projects and the positive things, we're not going to find much positive left there, because we don't prepare for the fight, right? And again, I don't know what the answer is, but if we're going to go do these fights, we should at least start by training for the fight and doing so professionally. But I don't know. We just don't seem
No,
to.
no, I I will always agree that our training and our prep could be better, and it could have been a lot better. I did see it change. Now, yeah, yeah. If it went from 0 to 5, then so be it. That's a change. So I won't argue with you that it wasn't sufficient. It could have gotten better. And from everything that I've heard, and I haven't been to NTC or JRTC in a little while, but from everything I've heard, we've kind of gotten back to the firing tables are more important
Right,
than
right.
but what I will say is that the overarching system that the training centers fell under never changed. So, I think they changed almost as much as they could have within that system. And then the second thing I would say is, at the end of the day, policy trumps everything. And so if the policy
Yeah,
is we are not that interested in winning, whatever that means, or not even defining winning, we're not interested in. I mean, that's kind of what basically McChrystal was told when he first got in the country. Well, wait a minute, we're not interested in you winning right now. Um, and so if you don't have a specific policy objective that you're trying to go towards, and it's pretty clear, I thought it was pretty clear at the general officer level, that the politicians for multiple administrations, and to some extent our people as well, because we really haven't had massive anti-war demonstrations or anything like that, especially like we saw in Vietnam. Everybody seems okay with just kind of status quo. Then what's to drive us to change that system that our training centers are operating under? So I would argue that the generals had, they were kind of following what the politicians were telling them was important, which was, hey, just kind of do what you're kind of doing right now, and let's hope that we can kind of phase out and turn towards what we like, which is a near peer threat, and we can spend lots of dollars buying big programmatic things for for those kinds of things.
yeah,
So I would argue it wasn't like we decided we are not going to prep for Afghanistan. It was, we've got a bunch of money. What are we going to do with this money? Well, we're not going to do something that the politicians don't want us to do with that money.
right.
At the end of the day, and so if they're not punishing us for not doing the things that you and I would say on the ground makes total sense, then why do those things, right? So, and I hate to push it all into the policy people, because that kind of sounds like the argument that some people would make about Vietnam, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I think policy does drive the decisions, and I think for the most part we met what the policy expectations were, and can continue to do so. I mean, I talk to civilians a lot. I give presentations on Afghanistan and what we're doing, and I just don't see a lot of people, other than just a little bit, wondering why we're not making any more progress. They're not upset. They're not demanding that we pull out tomorrow. So
Yeah, someone's at fault, right? Someone's holding the bag, and this is no knock on Secretary Austin, but I mean, the last time we saw him in a combat zone, it was a bunch of failure, right? Like, we were pulling out and we were continuing to add the instability to the area. And maybe he's just a 50-50 success rate, but what's to say he's going to do any better now that he's in a policy spot? He was there. It was his job to get us out of there. Technically, he did all of that fine. And look at the mess that was left as we left. And One of the things we don't train on is transition operations. We tend to abandon our partners, whether they're Kurds, Iraqis, Afghan leaders. We just tend to just leave. Poof, we're going. Hey, we're going to go soon. We never ask the simple questions as an institution. Hey, what do you need to survive? Because no shit, we're leaving in about 6 weeks. Maybe someone will poke in every now and then, but we are leaving. And when I was able to have these conversations with the leaders that we were partnered with, they would not believe me, and then they would have a look of terror on their eyes, and then they would have a very practical list of things like, here's what I need, and among those things was a generator, a simple generator to power their operations. So if we don't care to win or care to define winning, I mean, again, I'm going to put that on the generals because that is sort of their job is to run the organization. And when we don't think to even partner well enough to transition away, I mean, these guys get killed. I mean, the mayor in the area I was in was dead within 18 months because we just up and left. We left capacity that they could use behind on the roofs of buildings. And they didn't know about it, and so it just gets stolen and it gets turned into whatever money or enemy capacity. So these are things that I think if we want to be mad at the politicians, sure, look who's in charge now, more of the same people. I mean, the generals from these wars are running the companies that have created a whole bunch of failure. And I think people are upset about that. And people are upset about spending trillions of dollars overseas when we clearly could spend that money here better. And I'm not an isolationist, but if we're going to go, we should give a damn to go well and then prep our people so that they're competent. I mean, again, we didn't even ever develop a professional interpreter school where we can work with interpreters at the elite level and know how to use any interpreter anytime, anywhere. We never built that capacity as an institution. We all, if and you and I both know, if I was to go into a room with you in a conference with military people and say, who's deployed? Great, hands up. Who's worked with an interpreter? Great, hands up. Who was great at working with an interpreter? And they would all leave their hands up. But that's not true. Half of that room is below average, but we don't study it, so we didn't even know what below average is. So why not put this on the generals? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot with something with your bosses.
They're my bosses, so I can't blame them.
But this is the question the public wants to know. Like, if the generals aren't upset about losing over and over again and failing over and over again and creating instability, I mean, I developed a rule: whatever we're doing creates instability unless you can prove otherwise externally. So unless you have someone on the battlefield running around to validate your claims of stability, you're creating instability. And because we don't look at it that way, we just continue to create instability. And you could see it all the time. I mean, how many conversations have I had or heard commanders say, we need to find someone to kill? We can't make the enemy show up. My job is to close with and destroy the enemy. Let's find someone. And then hopefully someone like me is in the room to go, hey, hold on. Before you go out and kill someone, let me do my job a little bit and see who we're trying to kill and figure out, who's dangerous, because you can go to deployment to a dangerous area. They're all dangerous, but a dangerous area and maybe have 20 enemy killed because they won't engage in the fight that we're training for. So if not the generals and gosh, politicians, when are they ever held accountable other than being voted out of office? Who is it? How do we sort this out, man?
No, you remind me of a conversation that is happening in multiple venues. But there's a questioning of our current military structure. So for the listeners, this might get a little militarily esoteric, but we have regional combatant commands. And so for every portion of the world, we've carved up these commands that control the operations in these different regions. So for instance, we have European Command or EUCOM, and we have PACOM, Pacific Command. For the Middle East, it's Central Command, CENTCOM. So these regional commands, again, I'll go back to my, I study bureaucracy at NC State University right now in the public administration program, and so everything looks to me like a bureaucratic problem. But we have these organizations that are very large, considered if you compare them to like the State Department, um, and so they have a lot of influence in foreign policy. They drive a lot of decisions. They have the ear of the president, um, and so there is really, I would argue, no State Department and probably not even on the intel side. The CIA. There's really nothing like what we've got in the military. We've got these massive headquarters that are like UCOM is positioned in Germany, so it's right there. It's dual hatted with other NATO headquarters, so they've got all kinds of influence. PACOM is in Hawaii, but still, just a lot of influence in the region, with ambassadors and with the president. And so a lot of people are arguing that that structure, since it's geographic based, it is, again, the systems and processes that these guys fall under is it's really conducive to maybe running a Desert Storm style operation, where the conflict is limited to a few countries or maybe one country, and you can line up all your forces, act, and then you're done. What it doesn't necessarily do is help us in the long term with non-military types of efforts. So if you're talking diplomacy and you're talking transition, which it's not just a military thing, you're talking if you're talking long-term effects, if you're talking intel capabilities and information, that kind of stuff, that's a lot of that stuff is outside of the military framework. Yet the main player that we have in these regions are these geographical combat commands. So should we change those? Should we be more problem focused, or something like that? There's definitely a problem between the geographical combat commands, the regions. So if you have a problem that stretches across two regions, how do you do that? Well, you have to get the combat commands to talk to each other, and there's all kinds of bureaucratic case studies on why that's a difficult thing to do. So I guess my final comment would be, if we could change that system, I think you would potentially be able to get after these transition issues or long-term issues. And the great example I can think of right away, as soon as you started talking, was the Shia in the south of Iraq. So after Desert Storm, what did Saddam do in the Shia south? He retaliated on him, right? We
Yeah.
kept some connection with the Kurds in the north, not enough, I think a lot of people would argue, but we kept some connection with them. We did, do some no-fly zones up there and help them out a little bit. Well, when we went back into Iraq, you know, I've heard and I've read all kinds of reports about the success that we had in the north with the Kurds. When we linked up with them, we had special forces go in there, and we were able to do a lot of things with their proxy forces. You hear nothing about the Shia South. Yet the Shia, especially in the South, the Shia in general were a perfect proxy force, just like the Kurds were against Saddam. Well, why weren't we successful there? Well, it's 100% because we just totally dropped them. And
Yeah.
again, I'm not going to totally blame the politicians or the general. I think the blame can go around, but I think part of the problem is that CENTCOM was told, and the systems and processes that CENTCOM kind of govern CENTCOM. So if you go to CENTCOM headquarters, likely you're going to go there for two years, and then you're never going to come back to CENTCOM headquarters. To me, that's terrible. There's no regional expertise, all this kind of stuff. So again, I think the way the geographical combat commands are structured was not necessarily supporting what we needed at the end of Desert Storm. Looking, hindsight is 2020, forward to when we had to go in there, and that's totally ignoring the should we have gone into Iraq again. That I'm just talking. You're talking transition, a
Yeah.
perfect opportunity for us to have used some friends that we kind of made a little bit
Right.
after Desert Storm in the 90s, and I haven't seen a lot of reports on that. I would call that a failure, total failure. But
I would, yeah, I would. A one of many. I mean, just think about this. As we're partnering, we're getting to know the most influential people in the region. If we're at all good at what we do, I'm good at what I do, so I'd always know these guys. Often, these people would get elected to parliament, and now they're trying to figure out how to, like, they know how to run parliament in their own country, but they would ask me, they're like, how do I? You talk to the people. I would oftentimes, Grant, I would get asked by the Iraqi leaders, like, hey, you're my cultural advisor. How do I understand how to get these other tribes to work in conjunction with me? What do you suggest? You think about that, right? And that's not a trained capacity. That's capacity from me staying in the area, getting to know these guys. By the way, how many of these guys were approached by anybody else from our long-term assets that would stay in country? You have these guys that love us, that would love to work with us on a continued basis, but we didn't. We just left. They're like, hey, you guys have water capacity on that camp that you're going to shut down. Are you going to take it or leave it? And the commander I was with was like, we're leaving that. We're not going to come get those things. And they're like, can we have it? And he's like, I don't know. I don't know the answer. I mean, if you went and took it, I wouldn't even know about it, you know? So ultimately he has to like nod and wink and go, you know, see what you can do with it. But that's not transition. That's just happenstance. And we've got to do a better job of, you know, we complained a lot about abandoning our Kurdish allies. They're not allies, they're a partner. They're Iraqis ultimately in this case. But all we tend to do is fail our partners. Like we love to abandon the Kurds. We certainly abandon the Shia. I mean, that's absolutely true in the South. They, you know, they got hammered. We're not good at that. And we also the State Department is completely politicized. I mean, and it careens hard left and right every time it changes out, and it's insanity. And it's a brigade size element. So how does a brigade size element manage an entire world's diplomacy? You know, when a lot of the people in the State Department handle things like, you know, bureaucracy, you know, like passports and visas, and I'm in this country and have a problem. I mean, we're talking to brigade, and 2/3 of that brigade, you know, several thousand people are focused on something other than day to day diplomacy. So would we have to plus up the State Department capacity? You think about this. You go to any challenging province in Afghanistan where it's not very permissible, where there's absolutely no go districts, counties for the listener, where you just don't go there because there's not enough capacity to protect you if you go out there. There's one, maybe two State Department people in that entire state in Iraq or Afghanistan. How in the world can two people handle an entire state? Think about your home state. If you're in Ohio and there were two people from a foreign country trying to create diplomacy, how in the world do they manage all of that? It's not nearly enough
You
people.
had me at plus up. Yeah, I think it was Secretary Gates under President Obama who said, and he was DoD secretary.
Yeah,
He was arguing, "Hey, we have gutted the State Department. We have gutted our intel agencies. We've plussed up the military a ton." I think one of the data points he used was we had more USAID, um, so basically agriculture experts in the State Department. We had more USAID personnel in Vietnam
mm,
alone during the Vietnam War than we currently have total.
yeah,
Um, and yes, the State Department. So the diplomacy, if it's important, you know, but we've gutted it since the 80s. And I would say the same thing on the intel side. So I would be 100% for that notion, plussing up our diplomacy resources. The intel side, I would say, has been hurting. Um, Now, I'm not going to say whether that should come out of the military's hide. It's got to come out of somewhere, or you got to
yeah,
increase your budget. But
yeah,
but yeah, I definitely think, and I would say a lot of military people would agree with that. That we can't just build up the military. There's got to be, and what's happened, I think, since the 80s is terrible. And with that, when when you're in Afghanistan and you get someone that comes in for a year and then they leave and then they never come back. They might go
yeah,
to Iraq for a year, and then they might go to Korea for a year. Then might go to so the system, I would say, in the last 20 years has really been for the system's purposes, not for necessarily with the fights we are in. Now, I will say this again. I don't want to sound like the corporate guy supporting the institution, but there is a promising reform right now that we've been working for 2 years. And it's called Talent Management Task Force in the Army. All the branches are doing talent management reform. What's
right.
different about now, because we've always tried to do that, we've always talked about it. What's different about it now is Congress actually gave us authorizations to change our personnel system. So you
Mhm.
probably know, for those of you who don't know, our personnel system is governed largely by Congress. So, if there's a law that says you must do X, you can't just change that if you want to. So
Right,
Congress actually gave us authorization to change some of those things. So, for instance, in the Special Forces, Civil Affairs, and Psychological Operations branches in those fields, we are looking at changing how we manage our personnel. So when would we promote a special forces officer? What kind of education would they go and get? Because right now it's largely Army driven. So again, going back to those systems and processes, I fell under the Army system while I was in Afghanistan. So the Army system ruled me. It told me what I should get educated on. It told me, when I should get promoted, what I should do to develop myself to get promoted, when all those things. Not necessarily conducive to the special forces missions, just in general, the branch missions, but also what you were just saying, the current fight, so the counterinsurgency effort. So I don't want to hold my breath because bureaucracy is what it is, and it can always get co-opted. But
Yeah.
there's definitely some potential for reform right now. We're talking about it. We're piloting some new things. May not pan out to anything, but it is something that I've seen recently. A little late, a couple
Yeah.
decades, but it's something that the organization I think has said, hey, look, we can't keep on with this industrial system that we've had that was relatively good for the Cold War. Um, not so good for right now, especially. I mean, the greatest example I think they gave was we had a West Pointer who got a Rhodes Scholar. So he goes over and he does that right out of West Point. Well, then he misses his platoon leader time, and then he's
Yeah.
got to get out. He's got to
Yeah.
get out of the Army
Yeah.
because he's so smart. He got a Rhodes Scholarship, and the Secretary of the Army said this is insane that we have a
Yeah.
system like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
sad that it's taken us 20 plus years to figure that out, or you could even say when the fall of the Berlin Wall happened, we should have been figuring this out. But hey,
This is such a problem. I mean, you're identifying a key thing. You have all these people working in connection with each other. And I want to illustrate how challenging this is. I also want to give everybody a buy. I'm like, this is impossible to get right. It's so big, so multi-systemed, so nodal that it's very, very hard to map out. And who the hell wants to do that? We'd rather just get in our tanks and go around and fuck shit up because that's what we know we're good at. So let me just give everybody a pass on this. Everybody has a desire. Everybody's trying to build capacity. Everybody's trying their damnedest. It's just this ship is a very big ship and it's hard to get it to move. When you deploy to Afghanistan or Iraq, you never come back in the same capacity with the same access, right? So Major Martin might come back and sit behind a desk the entire time, and rightly so, because you've got to take your experience and you got to, develop. But even if you're in the same province, you're never going to go back out in the same capacity and be able to do anything with the lessons that you've learned. You're always learning new lessons. What made me special was that I stayed and I stayed out on the ground and I watched unit after unit. So I could, and you'll understand this, Grant. I focused, I look at combat like half of an equation, right? And we are the biggest problem. If we can reduce the amount of problems that we create through our action or inaction, then we have a chance of affecting and balancing this side of the equation. If we can't control this side and it's all herky jerky, this is never going to pay attention. And you think about like multi-year partners, like someone partner comes in, it's like, hey, listen, I've got the greatest idea. We're going to do plan A. And he's like, the last 5 dudes, and I've sat in the conversations and heard them. Last 5 guys have said plan A was going to happen. So go on about your business. I'm going to go on about mine. We're literally driving people insane. And they would stop working with us. They would act like it, but they wouldn't, because we never developed the capacity to transition that relationship and to shut the hell up and figure out what was possible. So we have to improve these things. And then when you do develop a singular capacity, someone like me, I'm working with commanders, and commanders are looking me in the eye and saying, you're the largest force multiplier I've had. And this is brigade commanders. This is brigade sergeant majors. These are highly placed people. But how do they put me into the system somewhere where I can continue to help? I'll go sit in front of a pole lad who's a political advisor for a commander, like a general, maybe a full colonel. These are high level people, and they haven't got the first clue what's happening on the ground. They might go out every now and then on a safari and go out into the combat zone, but for the most part, they don't know. And so I can sit in that room and simply tear apart everything they're saying because they have no earthly clue what they're talking about. They're in what I call the spaceship. And they're so detached from the ground. But there's no home for me. There's no developmental path for someone who's a DoD civilian. It's like, hey, your time here is done. Go home. And so all that capacity leaves. And then when I try to knock on the door to come back in, and I'm not the only guy like this, there are thousands of people that have tremendous capacity that we've just pissed away. And that's lieutenants that become Rhodes Scholars. You think about this, Grant, like a battalion commander who's owns an infantry battalion. This is for the audience. Grant gets all this stuff. That's about 1,000 people. And then you're like, hey, listen, we have to have a footprint out here. Don't get into any fights because we can't come and help you. You're too far removed, but we have to be there. You're going to make sure the elections happen. You're going to provide security and work with the local authorities, Afghan army, Afghan police, Afghan, whatever is on the ground. But do not do anything more than that. It's an economy of force issue, right? It's a platoon. This person's sent hundreds of miles away, sometimes away from their home unit. They're so far that no one ever comes to visit them. They get provision from airdrops. They're so remote, so rugged. And if they go further than, let's say, an hour away from the camp, they're in peril. I mean, they are no longer in charge of their own security because someone else could easily ambush them, right? So that lieutenant is extremely valuable. They've done something incredible if they pull that off, but it's not weighted in a way that is beneficial. Like, hey, you did this thing, you showed incredible restraint, everybody came back alive, you partnered with your person. Wow, incredible. But that's just doing their job. But I would say that's an exceptionally challenging job to do that. And then here comes the State Department to come out to work on election results or all these other people that have all these things pulling at all of their resources. And you're talking about, let's say, 40 people out in the middle of nowhere trying to survive. That's insane. And then how in the world can that team create any kind of change? There's not even a road back to town. You have to do a donkey and a cart. And I'm
Right.
not exaggerating on these things.
No, no, no. No, it reminded me. So we had this 4 star. I won't tell who to protect the guilty, but we had this 4 star come in once when I was in Afghanistan in 2007, and I was at Bagram Air Base, and he came in and he got the normal briefing. Here's what we're doing, and he asked at one point. He interrupted and said, "Well, what that team that you just briefed me that is in this one fire base? Why are they there? What are they doing?" And the commander kind of repeated, "Well, this is their task and their purpose." Well, yeah, I got that, but why are they there, not somewhere else? And the answer back was great. The commander said, "Well, that was where the team that they replaced was." you know, there was no logic. It reminded me of the Colin Powell line from his book
Mhm.
when he was in Vietnam, where he asked, why is this air base here? Well, the air base is to provide support to the fire base. Why is the fire base here? The fire base is here to protect the air base. So the logic was such that you know we didn't change things because that was where the last group was. And so I did run into a commander back in. So fast forward to 2010, I ran into a commander who he was in the south and near Kandahar, and I said, I was asking him, what's going on, where are your, why do you have, you've changed a lot. He had changed a lot of where the units locations were and what they were doing, and I said, why'd you make those changes? It got a lot of people upset, but they haven't fought back on it, and some of them I'm not sure why you made the changes. And he said, well, it's simple. I can change where the locations of my units are, and I'm going to if it doesn't make sense where they are. And I said, oh, well, that's great. You're talking sense. So where did you get that sense? How did you make sense of the situation that made you change? Because I hadn't really had that conversation very much. And it was what he told me was I thought brilliant. He said, I take a trip to Bagram. I mean, yeah, to Bagram, and then also Kabul, the capital, and I go and talk to the people in the State Department. If I can talk to the ambassador, I'll talk to the ambassador. I go in and talk to the generals. I try to find out who was the last person that had a VTC with the president. What was that conversation about? What's the current feeling at the headquarters in terms of what we should be doing? And I come away from those visits with at least an inkling into what he called the logic of the moment. And I've always remembered that phrase because what he was saying was there's always some logic that's driving decisions, and you don't know what it is because you're not privy to every conversation. They're not going to publish this stuff because a lot of it might get you in trouble, but it is running decision making.
Yeah.
And if you don't know what it is, if you don't know what the logic of the moment is, then you're kind of blind, and you're going to stick a platoon out for no reason in somewhere that it might sound good or whatever, but at the end of the day, it's actually not good. And so what he said was that's what was guiding, the last trip he got where he went to Kabul, he said I came up with 5 things that were important right now to
Yeah.
NATO, to the President of the United States, and to ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, the headquarters in Kabul. And I said, that's how I made my decisions on where people were going to be. And some units I actually gave them. This is this guy talking. Um, I gave them the mission to stay alive.
Yeah.
They had 6 months, and their main mission was to stay alive. And he said it might not make sense. I would never put that in writing, but it was based on the logic of the moment that I deduced from my visit to to Kabul. And I just remember when McChrystal was told, "Hey, don't win this year. We got the elections coming up, and we got all this other stuff." And so if you don't know that stuff and you don't
Yeah.
understand the priorities, it can be very. I would argue it can be very frustrating on the ground, and nothing makes sense. And why am I here? You know?
Yeah. And I'm going to be critical of guys like McChrystal and all of the peers that have run this thing. How many of them have come in to, I mean, all of them, every single one has said, we've turned the corner in Afghanistan. You can absolutely go out and look for these, go bing these terms. Mattis has said it. I'm sure at some point, Secretary Austin will say it. We've turned, and he might have already said it, right? We've turned the corner. And if we've turned the corner that many times, we all know what shape that makes. And we continue to do this. One of the things that I was a master of doing, and I learned this through mistakes and being there a lot, was when the unit would come in and say, okay, we're going to do Operation X. And I would go and I would look in the system, in the SharePoint, right? The Army has this, and the military has this SharePoint thing, and you can go in. Everybody knows about SharePoint, but in the Army, it's kind of like a joke thing. And I would take the slide decks from the last 5 units, or as many how far back I could go, and I would present to them the execution of Plan X, the previous 5 units, and say, and I would go to a major, right? 'Cause usually didn't take this to the commander, and there would always be a captain there next to them, and they'd be talking about this Plan X, and I would say, do Plan X if you want. It's your guys' unit. You guys do what you want to do. I'm here to help. Can I just offer you these slides from the last 5 unit talking about Plan X and how they were going to whatever that thing was? Open route chicken is the one that I was last did. They continued to open route chicken. There'd be a picture on the wall in the PRT. We open route chicken. What year is that from? Oh, that's from 2008. Aren't we opening route chicken again right now? Or the rehab or whatever the project is. The captain would get pissed at me because I'm some stupid civilian and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, even though, I'm just trying to help. And the major would get it. They were seasoned enough to go, oh shit. Okay. All right. Yeah. Let's figure out what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because if a major takes that message to the commander or a colonel takes that message to a higher level commander, it has a lot more weight than when I say it. I haven't built up the cred with this newer unit. But these are things that happen all the time where we repeat the same big grand actions that haven't delivered success in the past. And we just can't afford 5 of those. So like when you look for a commander that tries to do 5 things, I would say do one thing right. Get one thing that you can reliably do right. And it's not what you're thinking of. It's super small. It's very specific. And if you have the experience and those lieutenants that end up, so we had a lieutenant transition into the space where we were trying to leave and everything else, and they were going to be just a status quo force. They were going to pack up and get out of there. And we said, do not forget about this partner. He's fantastic. He's introduced us throughout the entire province to people. He gets it. He wants to lead. Do not drop the ball here. And he's like, yeah, I got it. I know what I'm doing. I got it. Next thing you know, his guys get ambushed out at a checkpoint. He loses 2 or 3 dudes in a green on blue or blue on green. And we saw him later and he's like, I should have listened to you guys. I should have listened to you guys. But because we don't develop that capacity to listen to the people that have the knowledge, and I'll shut up after I say this, but Ann Smedjinghoff was in the area, the same area, right? And she's a State Department lady, and they go out on a mission to take pictures of themselves handing books to Afghan kids. And they get blown up and she's dead. She had happened to have met John Kerry, Secretary Kerry, weeks before, so she was fresh in his mind. And he eulogized her and talked about how, evil people who force other people to do what they want them to do, they're terrible. But really, he was describing us because the year before I had run around with my partner, and one of the things the Afghans said clearly, it was the government, tribal leaders, religious leaders. They all said emphatically, never, ever, ever deliver books straight to kids. It's inappropriate. It's dangerous. Never bring them to us. I, as the Ministry of Education, and think about this. This is the Ministry of Education talking to us. It says, I will arrange for time for my guys to come pick that up from you. What we want help, and we desperately need your help, and this is how to measure how we do on educating our kids. We are desperate to be better at this. And so we wrote all this down. State Department had it. And what happens? They go out in a photo op and they get people killed doing the exact thing they were told a year before. Now, you think the Afghans forgot about that lesson? No, they didn't. But the State Department did. And the dude, I'll say his name, Tim Basher, had that report. And he had the inability to stop it, I guess. But he knew that that's what the Afghans wanted, and he went against them. So these things do matter. And maybe they would have died that day anyhow, doing whatever they were going to do. Maybe it was their day no matter what, but don't die doing that. And we have too many times where these things happen. And we look at like, if the politicians don't care, then let's just not even go. If that's how we're going to act, if we're not going to be prepared, if we're not going to listen to good advice, if we're not going to, if we're going to just blow money and lives, it's too many. It's too much. Let's spend $1 trillion here, or just learn how to be better partners. I mean, we're dicks. We're dicks. You know, the army shows up unannounced all the time, Grant. You know this. They show up with guns, like a bike gang, right? We show up with guns, we eat all your food, and then we walk away and nothing ever happens. I have heard Shake say that over and over again. You guys show up, you eat food. I'm glad to feed you. I love talking to you, but nothing ever happens. I
You
got
know, you remind me of United Nations workers saying the same things about the United Nations.
yeah,
There's a
yeah.
great book, in fact, I always mention it, Emergency Sex. I don't know if you've read it, but there
No,
were
no.
3 UN workers that wrote a book called Emergency Sex that was really critical of the UN. But they were basically saying the same thing. You know, they go in and they don't do a lot, and they make everybody mad in their area. Um, but they did have one good thing to say about a special forces team in Haiti, so I always remember it because
Nice.
they were basically trying to help the Haitians, and this was after Aristide and everything. But um, they were trying to help the Haitians, and they weren't. The UN headquarters wouldn't give them permission, and they came across this special forces team that was in this little village, and they were like, "Oh, if only we could be like these guys. They've got guns, and their bosses tell them to just establish peace, whatever that means. And so they
Yeah,
just go and do what they can to help people without having to, be micromanager and that kind of stuff. And people listen to them because they have guns. It was a great line. But no, I do have to say, you reminded me of the time I briefed McChrystal. So, I could have a lot of things to say about General McChrystal, but one thing that I thought was really interesting that sticks out in my mind, I had to brief him about the plan to train the police in the Afghan army,
mm,
Afghan police and the army for 2010. So we redid our operations order and how we were going to accomplish these objectives of training them. And this was NATO training mission Afghanistan in 2010. And so we briefed him, and at the end of the brief, he kind of hung his head and he said, "Guys, I've heard this. I've been here. I've visited Afghanistan in the past. And this is the same stuff I've heard in years past." And he
mhm.
said, "We can't just keep on doing the same stuff. Surely we're doing something different." And
No,
there was this silence.
no.
And I was a major at the time. There's all these generals in the room. I was just the facilitator of the brief. I had participated in the planning, but so I couldn't let silence go.
Yeah, yeah.
And so as the facilitator, I jumped in and I pointed out the one thing that we had worked on that was different, which was our assessments construct. And we had these guys in the back who had developed it. And I thought it was pretty good. It had worked in some subjective stuff. We tried to get away from the ORSAs, these these analysts that rely on multivariate regression only. If it's not measurable, it's not real kind of guys. And I know I'm going to make all the enemies of the in the ORSA community out there, but the but I thought we'd put together at least something. We were trying something different. So I mentioned this to General McChrystal, and I said, you know, we've got this new assessments construct. We've got the people that developed it right behind you. They can brief it if you would like them to. Um, but we really can't tell you based on our previous assessments constructs what we'd been doing wrong. And oh my gosh, the look on the generals' faces when I said that.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was kind of like, oh well, yes sir, we're doing a lot of things different. We're going to train more police than we did last year. We're going to train
Okay.
more army guys than we did last year.
Yeah,
And at the end of that, he kind of hung his head, and his shoulders drooped,
yeah,
and he was like, "Ah, guys, it just sounds like more of the same, but okay, let's move on." And at the end of the thing, my boss comes up to me and says, "Never tell a general that you don't know why you're messing up, or what you're doing is wrong." But honestly, yeah, I got the picture then that he was realizing that Afghanistan was way more complex than what he had been in charge of in Iraq, which was the JSOC mission,
mhm,
targeting bad guys and taking them out. And I think he realized the team that he was having to deal with. Obviously I wasn't privy at the time to his conversations with the ambassador and the president, but I think he was slowly realizing that this was just it was just an effort that we were willing, the politicians were willing, and largely our populace were willing to just not do the things that you and I are saying we
yeah.
should have done. So,
There's
but
there's a big problem in terms of how the Army, I think, drives this mission. So I'll say the Army, how the Army measures things. And they always talk about the effect, but it's really the affect, especially when you say hearts and minds. You can't effect hearts and minds, you have to affect them. And when we look at things like, well, we'll just train more, that's effect driven thinking. If you don't make the police the first go to for a civilian to call, to reach out to trust, then you, commander, have failed your mission. If you can't increase that affective measure, you you're a no go. And good luck making the next rank because this is your job. It's hard, but you have to focus on it, especially when there's no dead Taliban showing up. I mean, look, we had, and God bless. I mean, these are excellent units. A bunch of guys from the striker world came out, and they don't have strikers. They're like, we're going to take our vehicles that we have, we're going to push south, we're going to encircle the Taliban and kill them, and pull the sword and flag. All right. Well, first off, all of these vehicles here won't make it 10 miles without breaking down. You're going to be self recovering. Two, there are no roads. Three, you're here in the wintertime. There's a reason why they don't fight in the winter. It's because the road is going to disappear. And so, we try to be very proactive and very kind with this, that ain't going to work plan. But, they have to learn the hard way. And so they did. And, what happens? They got off the main route, started going into the hills, and then boom, vehicle slides off the road. Because just for the audience, these vehicles weigh a lot. I mean, over 10,000 tons. I mean, sometimes 4 times that. And they're on a dirt road. And sometimes the road disappears because you don't know where it is because it's covered in snow. And next thing you know, like someone's like, well, we stopped. I have to go to the bathroom. And then everybody has to go to the bathroom. And then everybody gets hungry. And the next thing you realize, like, we have made it 8 miles off of the main road and we're already stuck and not anywhere near where we're going. And this is just going to take forever. And they couldn't do it. And then the greatest thing happened: a giant boulder fell down into the main pass. And the engineer's like, I can move that bolt. They didn't even know about this. We learned about it through our connections. And we're like, you can't move this thing. They're saying they call it the mountain in the road, because it's so big. And this went on for weeks. And that finally the engineer had to admit to the commanders, like, there's no way I can move this thing. I can't move it. I can't break it. I can't blow it up because the whole mountain will come down on top of it. And so that pass for right now is closed and won't be open for months. We can work at this. We can get it done. But if you want to use this pass for military operations, you're going to have to find a different way to go. And engineers hate saying that, but just the fact that we brought it up and said this is a reality, that took weeks to get them to accept it and to even go out and look at it. So you have all these problems where we think about the effect, we aren't prepared to have the conversations, we hate it. And the biggest lesson I learned of all this stuff, Grant, and then I'm really going to shut up because we're going to run out of time, we are out of time, is one of the Afghan elders I talked to said there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And if I bring that lesson to a commander, if they don't go, well, goddamn, what does the boss want to do? Then I stop everything I'm doing and I focus on getting that lesson across. Most commanders get it right away, but a lot of them don't. And so one of the things I would do is I would go extract the local leader's plan. What is your plan? We're leaving. At some point, the last American is going to talk to you, and it's probably in the next few years. What do we need to get done? How do we help you? By staying out of your way, by not provisioning, by provisioning where you need us. And just by taking that approach, units did a lot better on being accurate because the guy would tell you, he's like, here's where I need help. Here's where I don't. Here's why I spend time not in my district because I have to be back at headquarters to talk to people. And I've got to split. All of these things became possible because we weren't trying to achieve the commander's objectives. We were trying to achieve the governor's objectives. And then the commander got his objectives in line with that governor. But that's rare. That's just not something that normally happens.
You reminded me when you were talking the vehicle, my MRAP story that I told you, how we got our first MRAPs in Afghanistan, and and in 2007 we didn't have MRAPs. In fact, most of the units that I was in touch with were trying to downgrade their armor on their Humvees because the roads were couldn't handle the weight, and so we couldn't get enough Humvees in 2007 because Iraq. So um, units would say we need more vehicles, and one of the units that wanted more vehicles was a medical unit. They wanted ambulances,
Mm.
and their ambulances weren't necessarily the ones they were using weren't necessarily going to be on these bad roads. They were going to be maybe taking people on airfields and that kind of thing. So that they would use whatever they could get, and so they heard that there was a call out for MRAPs. How many MRAPs did we need? Well, nobody needed MRAPs in Afghanistan, but this one unit said, well, we need 12 ambulances. We can't get them because of Iraq, so let's ask for 12 MRAPs. We'll use them as ambulances.
Right.
They've got wheels, and we can put people in them. And so the request went up, and the general said at the time, "Well, we can't ask for 12. The Army likes solid round numbers, like 50 or 100. So let's ask for 50." And so that was our MRAP request in 2007. And then fast forward to 2010, you had for most of the units, you had to travel in MRAP convoys by then if you
Right.
were going anywhere outside the city of Kabul, where I was, which was almost impossible unless you were a unit that had MRAPs
Right.
or you were a large enough force that you could get MRAP. So it kind of shut down travel. And I think I told you this too, that the logic of the moment was at that specific time we were trying to fight for more NATO instructors, and the feeling was that if any NATO instructors got killed, that it would potentially, because of the politics in Europe at the time, it would potentially cut off some of the numbers of NATO instructors that we were getting. And so that was driving at least part of the reasoning, the logic of the moment, for us to have to run around in these massively huge vehicles,
Yeah.
um, which couldn't keep up with your Afghan counterparts vehicles. They were running around in Toyota pickups.
Yeah.
So,
There's
so
also
again,
that.
that logic of the moment. If you didn't understand it, then you were just frustrated to no end, right?
Also the juxtaposition or the conundrum, or whatever you want to call it, of like, hey, we've established security and stability here in Iraq, and you drive around in MRAPs and have body armor. And you act like it's a terrifying place, and yet you try to tell the local populace who are walking around unarmed. It's
Yeah.
funny
Well, I
thing.
mean,
So,
and just the notion of doing an assessment of where you are and
mm,
what you need based on that certain specific situation and the
yeah.
mission itself, that was lost. And no matter where you went, you needed full body armor. In fact, I think at one point a buddy of mine said that they were checking to make sure you had your Kevlar, they call it diaper, but the
Hmm.
the Kevlar
Yep.
covering around your groin area.
Yeah.
They were making sure everybody had that on, which of course when you walk, it kind of made you waddle, and it was just uncomfortable as heck, and you weren't really tactical. Yeah, but they had, to leave the base, they had somebody sitting there, doing a
I
cup
want
check
to
on you, I
explain
guess.
to everybody what you're describing. So imagine having body armor on. Okay, now you have to add side plates and blankets. So now you've got like these, I don't know, let's say large pieces of bread size things with clay plates in it. So that's an extra, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 10 pounds, whatever, right? And then around your neck, you have a bomb collar that you can have to put on depending on the unit. And then you have this cod piece thing that goes in front of your junk that may or may not, because body armor is not really worked out for everybody. I'm very tall from in the torso, so when I put that thing on, it would just wreck me over and over again. It just didn't work for me because I was too tall. And then you have this combat diaper, which is literally a Kevlar blanket that goes like a thong almost would, and it goes and attaches around, right? So all this stuff, nobody who goes out and patrols every day wants to wear this. And I guarantee you, if a unit is far enough out, they don't wear all that stuff. They wear as little as possible because you're not safer by wearing more shit. You're just applying,
Right. and
obliging
and
some
and and it didn't
are
matter
there,
if it got in the way of your mission accomplishment.
Right.
And again, going back to policy trumps all. You probably
Yeah.
remember a certain Senator Clinton, and I hate to you know throw one person or one party under the bus because everybody acts like this, I guess, at one point. But Senator Clinton was making it a big political issue, I think, in 2007, to where body armor was a huge issue, and that kind of continued after that. And so, if somebody, God forbid, died, everybody wanted to know, were they wearing body armor on the place where they got hit, and if they
Right.
they weren't, then let's go and fire some general in that chain of command, because that person obviously didn't care enough about these. Well, so what does that cause? That causes everybody to have to wear all this stuff. And again, I think it's a great example of where policy
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
trumping what the military thought was militarily reasonable, in terms of mission
And consider
accomplishment.
this, Grant, too. Yes, body armor, of course. If you don't want to just do plate carriers, great. You're not that kind of unit. However, there is a cost For every life you
Yeah.
save on every extra mission is more hip sockets that are destroyed, more knees that are destroyed, because we're not
Yeah.
walking on perfect, pretty
Which are long
sidewalks.
term, right?
Yeah. And that's
Right.
expensive. I mean, my hips are destroyed from combat, and my shoulders, same thing. All that weight borne on my shoulders for all those years, and you don't get to complain about it. You just keep going because that's your job. Everyone's going to break, but we don't think about that when we have that policy decision. We don't think about
Right.
making like when I went out as a collector. I'm a damn good spy. But when I was out with units, if I was out with your guys, right? If they didn't get it, they would soon. I never wasted a single question. There was no umming and ahhing. If I was there, I was as practiced as that Bravo was on a weapon with my questions, and they recognized it. We don't treat that mission seriously. We look at these things again like famfire, like we're just going to go out and we're just going to have conversations. And I would look at these. I mean, I'm talking senior people, and I'm looking at them like, what in the fuck are you talking about right now? You're not establishing rapport. I can look at this guy's body language. He's not happy. You're wasting his time. You know, the interpreter, I'll go talk to him later on and I'll find out what really happened in that meeting. And this is people above colonel. How about a general that shows up, not unannounced, but as unannounced as a general can. He comes out to a distant place. Is like, we're going to build you a mall out here, a strip mall. It's going to be the greatest bazaar ever. And we all look around like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? He doesn't even understand. He just knows that there's not a strip mall there. Well, there wasn't a strip mall there for a lot of reasons, but he never bothered to ask anybody. And so basically, now we have to deal with that screw up for months, as they're like, is that happening soon? How's it going to happen? Who gets a shop? And I get just distracted. So many hours of conversations until, and by the way, it was never going to happen. It was never, ever, ever going to happen. Anyhow, I'm going to go on all day with this stuff. So we have to stop. Um, we have time? No, I don't have time. I really want to talk to you about UFOs and everything, but we're just out of time, because that's interesting too. What do you want to say in closing? And listen, I appreciate it. I hammered away with the stuff that I always hammer away on, but I think it's important to have these conversations to illustrate just how challenging this environment is and trying to understand how to win things. And yeah, you have the political fight and you have, the career progression fight and all these different things that pull, like all these things that extract resources from the resource bucket until there's no resources left to do any changing or fixing. I fully understand that. And I can try as hard as I can to knock on the door, write academic articles, but there's just no capacity left to pay attention to folks that have knowledge that can maybe inch us closer to the right direction. It's just a big, hard institution to create a reliable change in.
No, I would go out with saying one of my mentors once said, try to leave on a positive note with some hope. um, and so I will point this out that there are a lot of amazing people in the military. I know you know this.
Yeah,
And
for
I
sure.
kind of start out by saying that the NCO Corps, the non-commissioned officer corps, the sergeants that I work with, I mean, those folks are the reason that I go to work every day. I mean, if I lose hope and the bureaucracy is crushing me, all it takes is actually today after I'm done with you, I've got to go out to the field and take a guest commander brief from a special forces team that's in school, and they're about to finish up their final phase of the special forces course. And so I'm going to take their pre-mission their mission brief, and then they're going to go out into the woods and try to do what they're telling me they're going to do. And just interacting with those folks, interacting with their instructors, sergeants, first class, and master sergeants,
Yeah.
that just gives me the motivation to keep on trying and to do a little bit of what I can to make
Yeah.
the bureaucracy just a little bit less bureaucratic, to
Yeah.
get around the bureaucracy. So I mentioned that I'm in the warrior care program right now, and so we're helping wounded, ill, and injured soldiers. And for SOCOM, it's not just soldiers; it's the entire, all the other branches as well. And it's
Right.
because the system that we have set up for healthcare, it's not conducive to every problem that's out there. Just like any big bureaucracy,
What?
it it's got it's there's portions of it,
Yeah.
at least that are focused on efficiency, that kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
when I got back from Afghanistan the last time, my back and my knees, I could go on and on. We're all messed up. I went into physical therapy, and I was in a classroom of like 50 people with PowerPoint. I'm like, this is physical therapy. Um,
Jesus.
I went to physical therapy this year on my back, because I'm still having problems with my back. And I mean, I had my own physical therapist. He spent, 30 minutes with me, and that was just my initial thing. I've got to follow up with them soon. And so we have changed. We're continuing
Yeah.
to change. We're doing workarounds to the bureaucracy. Um, and with I mentioned the talent management task force. I'm hoping that institutes some change, and that we're able to
Please.
let people specialize and get nuance in their career development, so that they can break out of some of these systems and processes that I don't think are conducive to specialized missions like counterinsurgency. I'm one of the few that, or not one of the few. I'm one of the many actually that don't think we should totally change the entire military to focus on the current counterinsurgency thing. I think that makes sense, that we should have our focus on the conventional side, which if you lose a conventional battle, it could be catastrophic. But I
Yeah.
do think if we do these reforms and we keep trying, we might make some headway in those things. So I'll throw out that hope, and that positive note. But I will say there are a lot of people working really hard, and especially at the the sergeant and the junior officer level, and really take motivation from those folks to keep on trying my best.
Yeah, and I just want to say this too, because I don't want to be a dick the whole time. I believe in America. I believe in the DoD's ability to adapt, but they need an ass whooping, and they can take it. Those generals. I promise, every single one of those generals can take the ass chewing I would give them, because they have failed us. But they also understand that they could have done a better job. They're all getting paid plenty good for the results that they've delivered. So again, they can take it, and I believe in everybody's desire, everybody's passion, and all those things. Let me roll this video. Stand by for 1 sec.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching.